Hello and welcome to the IND podcast. Like, comment, and subscribe. Join our growing international community and see more political analysis by me, your host, Dennis Dunicic. Now let's get right into our main story today. And god damn it, I hope this is the last story I have to do regarding the Russo-Ukrainian crisis, but I think it might just be one of the last. Now, today, some very positive developments, and I can report some good news to you, have been made. Now, one of them is ostensible and debatable, and different information is showing different perspectives of what's actually going on depending on who you ask, and we will get into that. But the main aspect that is good about this story are the statements coming from the Russian leadership. Now, first and foremost is that Russia claims to have pulled back a significant amount of troops that were involved in the initial military drills and war games that were being carried out with Belarus. And number two is that Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated that he is willing to compromise and work and talk with the West regarding specific security concerns. More accurately, these security concerns that he wants to discuss with the West are Western proposals to come to an agreement with Vladimir Putin to de-escalate and stop the Russo-Ukrainian crisis and avoid a war. And the concessions that the U.S. is offering to make is to remove some intermediate range ballistic missiles from Europe that could potentially target Russia. In addition to this, there would be more transparency for military drills being carried out by NATO, the United States, and its allies. These are what are known as confidence-building measures. Basically, this is a form of cooperation where two political or geopolitical rivals come to some kind of confidence building where they cooperate on their different military exercises. And one party shows the other side that what they are doing is just inherently in their own security interests and it is not a threat to them. Now, if this is carried out, it is a very good thing because it could present a very solid long-term solution for alleviating tensions between the West and the East. Confidence building eventually leads to some form of cooperation, even if two parties such as the United States and Russia are inherently against one another. Having some kind of visual or know-how image into what is going on into the military operations of the other side inevitably leads to military cooperation and some form of friendship. Now, I'm not saying this is all going to end in kumbaya singing and everyone dancing and being happy and an alliance between the United States, NATO, and Russia. That probably is not going to happen. But at the very least, it's going to develop a more workable relationship between the two sides that can, in the long term, avoid specific geopolitical issues leading to a conflict as tense as what we have right now, which is the Russo-Ukrainian crisis. Now, it should be noted that these specific tensions of what is going on right now are the highest tensions between the West and East have been since the Cold War. Now, as a refresher, and we've covered this extensively, but basically Russia has amassed 130,000 troops alongside the Ukrainian border, with many people in the West, in Ukraine, and NATO believing that Russia is planning to eventually, if you ask the United States and NATO imminently, so any day now invade Ukraine, while if you ask the people in Ukraine, they are planning an invasion, but it's not right now. Now, basically, Russia stated that it has no intention of invading Ukraine, and it doesn't want to start a war in Ukraine, and has made key demands of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the United States. Specifically, that NATO bans the entry of Ukraine and other former Soviet nations into ever entering NATO. Additionally, they have demanded that the United States and NATO allies remove military resources and assets that are in Eastern Europe. And three, that it stops stockpiling missiles and other military equipment in nations that can create a preemptive strike on Russia. Now, NATO and the United States have both stated that these are complete non-starters, but they have made counter concessions to Russia, which Putin, as I just mentioned now, is willing to consider. Additionally, other good news is that the lower house of the Russian legislative body, the Duma, has passed not a law, but an appeal. Basically, it's a formal appeal that is going to be presented to the executive branch of the government, which is Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, to take something into consideration. That is what an appeal is in Russian politics. Now, basically, the appeal is to push and ask Vladimir Putin to recognize the Donbass region, so the eastern portion of Ukraine that has since 2014 been experiencing an insurgency of pro-Russian separatists. Now, what the lower house of the Russian legislative body wants to do, the Duma, what they want from Vladimir Putin is for him to recognize this region as an independent state of sorts. Now, that would obviously cause tensions to increase and make things even more complicated by Russia recognizing a certain portion of Ukraine's territory as independent and not being a part of Ukraine. That would just make the situation worse. Vladimir Putin has stated that he is not going to make any decision on the appeal yet, and he has to consider the political consequences of it. But keep something in mind. Russia is not a democratic country. I'm aware that what I'm saying is extremely controversial, and maybe legally Russia is a democracy, but most of the decisions that are made in Russian politics, including an appeal being made from the Duma, come from the presidency itself. The appeal never would have been made in the first place if it had no hope of being passed by Vladimir Putin. Now, I do believe that this is just a political strategic moment for the Duma to show that the Russian people want Donbass to be an independent region or even a state. Vladimir Putin is going to say no to this appeal, but he's going to counter argument with something. And I think at the end of the day, this shows exactly what Russia wanted the entire time. Russia and Vladimir Putin, its leader, are completely aware that NATO cannot prevent any nation from ever joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Making such a demand in the first place is just showing that it's one of those things where you make the higher demand expecting to be brought down to some other form of concession, and then increasing tensions until you get the middle concession that you always wanted in the first place. And then both parties are able to walk away and say, look, we won. Russia is able to say, we get good concession, we beat the American devil. While Americans are able to say, we put evil Vladimir Putin in his place. Both sides get a victory, and that is brinkmanship, which we've covered extensively, and that's what's going on here. Now, the main concession that I think is going to solve this issue, even though it's not acceptable really for a lot of Ukrainian people, is some kind of compromise related to the Donbass region. Now, obviously, what the Russians and Vladimir Putin would want is for Donbass to be completely independent and its own region, or two, to be some kind of protectorate state or satellite of Russia, kind of like Crimea is right now. Now, that would solve the problem immediately and would probably prevent tensions from escalating into a full-out warfare a very, 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 very long period of time, at least 5 to 10 years. But that being said, it would just show that Russia is slowly gaining more and more territory in Ukraine. Keep in mind that they annexed Crimea in 2014 and had a popular referendum that said that most people in Crimea felt that they were Russian and not Ukrainians and did not want to be a part of Ukraine anymore. The same kind of thing could eventually happen in Donbass, and it has been stated that as soon as there is peace and some kind of treaty or negotiation made to stop the conflict in Donbass, that a referendum will be done to see what country or what Donbass wants to be. Now, this could result in another Crimea situation where Russia now effectively controls two separate regions of Ukraine. And Donbass is not something that's easy to give up. Donbass is the industrial heart of Ukraine. It is economically and productively important to Ukraine. Now, in recent years where Ukraine has began to look at other industries such as the IT sector, etc., Donbass is not as important, but it is still crucial. And giving Russia another foothold in one's country is problematic. And it will set another precedent that says Russia can just come back in 10 years and take another region. Now, nonetheless, that may actually be the most favorable resolution to these tensions. Now, I'm not going to comment further on that. What you think about the Donbass region and who it should belong to. Again, I think everything should be solved by a referendum and the people voting. But let me know what you think in the comments about the Donbass region specifically. Now, we're going to cover the final part of our report today, which is supposed to be good news, but it's extremely debatable. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs have both claimed and stated that Russian soldiers that were down on the Ukrainian border, specifically in Belarus, that were doing war games and various military drills, have been pulling out and coming back to their spaces of permanent deployment. So they are no longer on the Ukrainian border. However, these claims seem to be relatively dubious. Number one, because Russia has not stated the specific location of where these soldiers were deployed. And number two, there has not even been given a number. They have not even provided a number of how many soldiers are actually being undeployed or pulled back or retreated, which is problematic. Now, in addition to this, The government of Ukraine, its intelligence services, the United States respectively as well, and NATO have all stated that they have not been able to find any proof or evidence showing that any Russian soldiers have been removed from deployments that are close to the Ukrainian border. And quite on the contrary, satellite imaging shows that there have not been troop retreats or retractions, but that in fact what has been happening is that there has been a deployment of more military personnel and resources towards Ukraine's border, specifically helicopters, fighter bombers, fighter jets, and other vehicles that are used in military warfare. These satellite images in the past few days have shown no signs of any kind of retraction. In addition to that, many smaller military units on the satellite imaging have been seen to leave larger containments and divisions and go set up camp in other places that are even closer to Ukraine's border. Now, these smaller contingencies of soldiers and army units are being theorized as what would eventually be used as staging points for what could be an invasion of Ukraine. Now, Russia's claims that it has pulled back its soldiers are obviously dubious, questionable, and I personally do not believe them until there is evidence to show it. Now, the evidence that Russia has provided are pictures that are not geolocated, that have no location, and that have pretty much no information. They just show a tank commander saluting his soldiers while a military band plays in the background. It's absolutely absurd. So there is no evidence, but nonetheless, it does show a willingness, whether or not Russia has moved back its soldiers, that it does want to somehow solve this situation diplomatically, while not leaving its military base. And it should be noted that even if Russia did retreat its soldiers right now, it wouldn't really mean much. Russia, in its military strategic history, has a tendency to retreat from its own territory when it goes to make negotiations. It takes the soldiers out, but it leaves all the military resources there. So all the vehicles, all the other military materials, so they can just have a quick deployment and rapidly regain their positions. So essentially it wouldn't even be a retreat at all. Realistically, right now, before any kind of treaty or agreement is fully made, where people are moving their troops, whether they're coming back home or not, is not relevant. And that's what the media keeps focusing on today. Did Russia remove its troops? That doesn't matter. What matters now is that dialogue is continuing and that finally a diplomatic situation actually seems like it is going to happen. Now, this is coming at a week where war never seemed more likely. Even Ukraine's leadership, who has, throughout this crisis, been extremely cautious and told people, listen, Russia not going to invade us. They just going to scare us. It's no invasion. They've even said, holy shit, Russia might invade. Those are not the exact words of Ukraine's leadership. What they've actually said is for people to find the nearest bomb shelters in their own cities. And Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, of who we did a report on yesterday, declared Wednesday, tomorrow, February 16th, as a national day of unity, because this is the day that many people predict Russia would invade Ukraine. Now, that is probably not going to happen now, but many people that were stating that the war would not happen, were beginning to say, shit, an invasion might actually happen now. But after today, after the statements of Russian President Vladimir Putin, which came after a meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, have shown that diplomacy is still on the table. And again, I'm just going to end this report by saying this is classic brinkmanship, bringing a crisis or a situation to the boiling point, making everyone think war is going to happen, and then at the last minute saying we can find a peaceful solution. This is a classic tactic used by both the Russians and the United States to create diplomatic and political gains in treaties and agreements. But let me know what you think. Do you think that war and an invasion is still likely happening within the next month? Do you think that this situation will be solved diplomatically? What do you think should be done with the Donbass region? Do you believe that it would be a good starting point to resolve this entire crisis? Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to see you guys tomorrow.